It was a cold winter night in January 2023, the kind where the stillness of the world outside feels almost suffocating. The snow fell gently, blanketing the city streets in a quiet, peaceful hush. Yet, inside one of the apartment complexes, a story was unfolding that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. A young woman, full of promise, with dreams as bright as her smile, was about to face a tragic end, one no one saw coming. Her name was Dattera Johnson. To those who knew her, she was the life of the room, full of laughter, hope, and potential. A soul that seemed destined for greatness, with a future full of possibilities. But all of that was about to come crashing down on that very night. The dreams, the hopes, the love, they would all be swallowed by a twist of fate that would leave nothing but sorrow in its wake. How did it come to this? How did a young woman, so full of life, end up the victim of such senseless violence? Was it a moment of vulnerability, a wrong turn, a love that turned dark? We'll take you through the tragic events that led to her untimely end. We'll unravel a story of betrayal, loss, and the fragile line between trust and danger. This is a story of a life cut short, a love gone wrong, and a chain of events that led to heartbreak and disbelief. But before we dive into the heart of it all, let's rewind to the days before everything changed. Dattera Johnson was born and raised in Indianapolis, a city known for its rich history and tight-knit communities. But for Dattera, it wasn't just the city that shaped her. It was the love and warmth of her family that provided the foundation for the woman she would become. Her mother, Amber, often fondly recalled how Dattera's laugh could fill up an entire room. Even in the hardest of times, when the world around them seemed heavy, Dattera's laughter was a light that couldn't be ignored. Her laughter wasn't just a sound, it was a beacon of joy, a reminder of the good in the world. Growing up in a household where love was the highest priority, Dattera never had to wonder if she was cared for. She was the apple of her parents' eyes, surrounded by family who constantly reminded her of her worth. Her younger siblings adored her, looking up to her as both a protector and a role model. They admired her ability to make friends with anyone and everyone she met. Whether it was at the grocery store or on the school bus, Dattera could strike up a conversation with anyone, making them feel at ease within minutes. At Beech Grove High School, it didn't take long for teachers to recognize Dattera's exceptional qualities. She wasn't just another student. She was someone who had a natural curiosity about the world around her. Particularly in science, where she excelled effortlessly, Dattera's thirst for knowledge was unparalleled. She didn't just learn facts, she absorbed them, constantly asking questions, pushing the limits of what she knew, and always striving for deeper understanding. Her friends remember her as the one who made the group feel whole. It wasn't about popularity or fitting in, it was about connecting with people, no matter where they came from or what their story was. Dattera had an extraordinary ability to bring people together, to create bonds that lasted. Whether she was organizing study sessions or planning weekend get-togethers, her energy and warmth made everything feel easy, fun, and inclusive. It was impossible to feel like an outsider around her. As high school graduation approached, Dattera was brimming with hope and ambition. She wasn't just graduating with honors, she was graduating with dreams. Dreams of college, of making a difference, of going beyond the boundaries of what her small town had to offer. Everyone who knew her could see the fire in her eyes, the drive to achieve, to push forward, to make something of herself. And yet, beneath all that promise, there was a vulnerability, a softness in her heart that she rarely showed to anyone. She trusted people easily, perhaps too easily at times. And while she had an abundance of friends, there were only a few she truly opened up to about her personal struggles, the things that weighed on her. But those closest to her knew one thing for sure: that era was destined for greatness. No one could imagine a world without her radiant presence. Her journey was just beginning, and everyone believed it would be one filled with achievement and happiness. But little did they know, the very qualities that made her so lovable, so genuine, were about to be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. It was during the final months of her senior year, a time when everything seemed to be falling into place for that era, that she met Anthony York. He was everything she wasn't expecting: charming, confident, and seemingly with a life that was already on the right track. They met at a mutual friend's party, where their conversation flowed effortlessly, and laughter was exchanged like old friends reconnecting. To that era, York was intriguing. His words were smooth, his smile infectious. He seemed to have it all: swagger, a sense of purpose, and a worldliness that made him stand out from everyone else in the room. In those first few weeks, everything felt like a whirlwind. Text messages turned into long late-night calls, and every encounter with York seemed to leave that era feeling more special than the last. He would show up to her favorite coffee shop, unexpected but welcome, always ready to sweep her off her feet with his attention. It felt innocent at first. The romance felt right, like something from a fairy tale. She was falling in love, and the future seemed so bright. It was a time of innocence, where every touch, every glance, felt charged with promise. But behind the perfect smile and smooth words, there was something off. That era was too consumed by the excitement of the relationship to notice the small signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Anthony York, for all his charm, had a troubled past, a past that wasn't so easily hidden. It didn't take long for cracks to begin showing. York had a history that he tried hard to keep buried, but the truth started to surface in subtle ways. A few late-night texts, a passing comment here and there, and then the odd behaviors that began to creep into their conversations. Anthony had a history of trouble with the law: petty theft, resisting arrest, and reckless behavior that had left a trail of damaged relationships. But at the time, these were just stories, rumors that era heard through the grapevine but was hesitant to believe. Her friends began to notice the change even before that era did. They had seen her go from a bubbly, social butterfly to someone who was quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped posting on social media, a habit she'd always had, sharing everything from sunsets to laughs with her followers. Now her feed was silent, and her friends grew concerned. She began missing the gatherings she would never have skipped before, the movie nights, the dinners, the random weekend trips they used to take. It wasn't like her to isolate herself. But it wasn't just the absence. It was the presence of Anthony York. He was always there, always checking in. At first it seemed like love, a protective boyfriend looking out for her. He'd text her constantly, even when she was out with friends. He'd show up at places uninvited, often turning up when she least expected, always just checking in. At first it seemed harmless, even sweet, but slowly her friends started to notice the subtle signs of control. One evening, at a party that era had planned to attend with her friends, she hesitated before leaving. York didn't want her to go. It was only after a heated exchange that she reluctantly decided to stay home. Her friends were confused. They'd never seen her so hesitant, so torn between two things that seemed so obvious to them: spending time with people who had been there for her versus staying home with someone who appeared to be pulling at her every move. Her connection to York was becoming harder to understand. Was it love? Or was it something else? Something more complicated and darker than anyone could have imagined? As the days went by, York's presence became more suffocating than comforting. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she was with, what she was doing. He began to isolate her from her friends, subtly questioning why she spent time with others when she could be with him. And that Era, so trusting, so eager to build her future, didn't know she was stepping into a trap. She wanted to believe the best in him, to believe that the control, the jealousy, and the possessiveness were signs of a deep love, a love that could grow and overcome all challenges. But love, when it starts to take the shape of control, can be deceptive. What seemed like care was in reality something far more sinister. A manipulation that would soon begin to unravel Datara's world in ways she couldn't have predicted. As weeks turned into months, what had started as an innocent, even idealistic relationship, began to take a dark turn. York's behavior, which had once felt protective, soon became controlling, destructive even. The sweet texts, the caring calls, and the spontaneous visits began to shift. Now, Datara's phone was constantly buzzing, but not with love notes. Instead, it was filled with accusations, questions, and demands. York's texts became increasingly volatile. Why didn't you answer your phone? Who were you with tonight? You're not going anywhere without me. These weren't the words of someone who loved her. They were the words of someone trying to possess her. The frequency and intensity of his demands grew, and soon, no matter where Datara was or who she was with, York's presence was always felt. The weight of his questions, the threats hidden between the lines, were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the phone calls anymore. When they weren't face to face, the texts flooded in at all hours, always demanding answers, no matter how small the question or how irrelevant the situation. Datara began to feel suffocated, like she couldn't breathe without permission. The messages became more intense, with York pushing for immediate responses, often berating her if she didn't reply fast enough. His anger was unpredictable, and she quickly learned that silence, even for a few minutes, would make things worse. But the control didn't stop there. York started to isolate her from the people who had been her support system. Her friends, her family, even her co-workers. She began to avoid social gatherings not because she wanted to, but because she didn't want to face the wrath of York. When she did attend, his presence was always there, like a shadow that followed her every move. If she spoke to someone for too long, York would question her. If she laughed with friends, he would accuse her of not caring about him. There was no escape. The tension between them started to spill over into the public eye. The once quiet apartment complex Datara lived in became a witness to the escalating violence. Neighbors began to hear the shouting, the yelling that echoed through the thin walls. What was once a peaceful complex was now a stage for the breakdown of a relationship that had once held so much promise. At first, it was just the shouting. But soon the physical arguments started. The sound of objects being thrown, the slamming of doors, the pleading cries. Datara's friends began to feel a sense of unease. They hadn't heard from her in days, and when they did, her voice seemed hollow, strained. Her social media accounts, once so lively, were now barren. The Datara they once knew seemed to be slipping away. 2 separate calls were made to the police in December following loud noise complaints from neighbors. The sound of breaking glass, of angry shouting. Someone had called for help, but the response was a blur. The police arrived each time, but no one ever pressed charges. York was present, of course, charming and calm, disarming the officers with his easy smile and convincing words. It was nothing, he would say. Just a misunderstanding. And because Datara was too afraid to speak up, too afraid to face the backlash from York, she kept quiet. Despite the increasing signs of danger, the system failed her. The police, though called, saw nothing to act on. The cycle of control continued, uninterrupted, unchallenged. York's grip on her was tightening, and Datara didn't know how to escape. She began to fear what would happen if she did. The danger wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Datara had become a prisoner in her own life, trapped between her love for York and the fear of losing him. She didn't realize it yet, but the world she had known, the world where she was free to be herself, was disappearing. The boundaries between love and control, affection and manipulation, had blurred so much that she couldn't distinguish where one ended and the other began. Datara had always been a fighter, always a bright light in a room full of shadows. But now she was struggling to hold on to herself. The girl who once smiled at the smallest moments, who had dreams of a future, was now silenced by the very person she trusted. And as the days passed, her friends, her family, everyone who cared for her, began to fear the worst. It was just another evening for Datara. She had returned home from the grocery store, the bags of food weighing lightly in her hands, unaware that she was walking into a night that would change everything. The evening had felt normal, peaceful even, with no signs of the storm that was about to tear her world apart. But when she reached her apartment, something was off. The door to her apartment was left ajar, the faintest sliver of light creeping out from within. It was unlike her to forget to close the door, and even though her mind told her to be cautious, she stepped inside, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond. No one could have known, not even Datara herself, that in just a few hours her apartment would become the scene of unimaginable violence. As the night unfolded, things began to shift in a way that no one could have predicted. At 3 a.m., one of Datara's neighbors, concerned by the unusual sight of the door left wide open, decided to check on her. It was a quiet, unassuming gesture, a simple act of concern that would later become crucial. What the neighbor found when they stepped inside was a scene of horror. Datara lay on the floor, her body a motionless heap. Blood pooled around her, staining the once safe space she had called home. She had been shot twice. One bullet had struck her arm, the other hitting her torso. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened just moments before. The neighbor, in shock and disbelief, immediately called 911. The response was swift, but the damage had already been done. As the paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, they rushed Datara to the hospital, their hands moving quickly, trying desperately to save her. Her mother, Amber, would later recall that moment, the moment when the world seemed to stop, when time felt suspended in an eternal state of waiting. She rushed to the hospital, praying that her daughter would make it, that the fight for her life was not yet over. But it was too late. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Datara's injuries were too severe. At 5 a.m., just hours after the first sign of trouble, Datara Johnson was pronounced dead. The life that had so much promise, so much potential, was extinguished in an instant. Her family, her friends, and everyone who had known her were left in utter disbelief. How could something so senseless, so tragic, happen to someone who had so much ahead of her? How could a young woman with dreams and aspirations be taken from the world so violently, so suddenly? Amber, heartbroken and shattered, was left to grapple with the devastation. The pain of losing her daughter in such a violent and senseless way was a weight she could never have prepared for. The life of Datara, the bright, warm, and compassionate young woman, was gone, and the world would never be the same. The investigation into Datara's tragic death began almost immediately. As news of the crime spread, law enforcement agencies moved quickly, knowing they had a pressing need to find her killer. The scene was chaotic. Evidence needed to be collected, witnesses interviewed, and the truth needed to be uncovered. But the killer wasn't easy to find. Anthony York, the man who had been Datara's boyfriend, had fled the scene, leaving behind only confusion and unanswered questions. He had taken with him her car, her phone, and her laptop, clear signs of a hurried getaway, a frantic escape from the consequences of his actions. It was almost as if he knew the walls were closing in on him and he needed to disappear as fast as possible. Detectives worked relentlessly, using every tool at their disposal to track York's movements. Within hours, they were able to confirm that he had left the apartment complex in a hurry. Security footage from the building showed a figure, his face obscured by a hoodie, exiting the premises with quick, deliberate steps. The police were getting closer, but still there was no solid lead on where he had gone or how to find him. Then, in a stroke of luck, the breakthrough came. A maintenance worker at the apartment complex, while going about his routine duties, stumbled upon a duffel bag in a dumpster. At first, it seemed like just another piece of discarded trash, but when the worker opened it to inspect its contents, he was shocked by what he found. Inside the bag were critical pieces of evidence: York's fingerprints, his bond papers, and, perhaps most damning of all, clothes stained with Datara's blood. It was as if the bag had been carelessly discarded, a desperate attempt to cover his tracks. But in that moment, everything changed. The evidence linked York directly to the crime. The police now had the pieces they needed to finally connect him to Datara's death. From there, the chase was on. York was no longer just a suspect. He was the prime suspect, and every resource was focused on finding him. Detective units across several states coordinated their efforts, tracking his every move. York's escape route had taken him far from Indiana, all the way to Arizona. It was there, in a small, run-down motel room, that he was finally cornered. York had assumed a new identity, living under an alias to avoid detection. But the authorities were relentless, and after days of searching, the police managed to locate him. When they arrested him, he offered no resistance, likely knowing the game was up. The man who had once been able to charm his way into Datara's life was now a fugitive, trapped by his own actions. York was taken back to Indiana, where he was processed and charged with murder. The legal proceedings would soon begin, but for those who knew Datara, the damage had already been done. No arrest, no trial could ever bring her back. The girl they had loved and lost would never walk through the doors again. But at least for the moment they had justice. As York was brought to court to face the consequences of his violent actions, Datara's family and friends could only wait. The long road to justice had begun, but the pain of her absence would linger long after the legal battles were over. On April 5, 2023, Anthony York was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the manslaughter of Datara Johnson. His actions, his control, and the tragic end to her life left a community in mourning, and a family forever changed. No amount of time would ever bring back the young woman full of promise, a life snuffed out by a relationship that had turned dark too quickly. But the story of Datara's life, and her tragic death, hasn't ended there. Through her mother Amber, a new chapter began. Amber established the Datara Johnson Foundation, a place of support for young people seeking to escape dangerous and toxic relationships. What began as a mother's heartache transformed into a beacon of hope for others. The foundation offers resources, counseling, and a safe space for individuals who are trapped in situations like Datara's, giving them a chance to break free before it's too late. Datara's legacy is not one of sorrow alone. It is a legacy of resilience. It teaches us to recognize the signs of abuse, to listen when someone says they need help, and to never ignore the power of control within a relationship. Her story is a reminder that the ones we love may be struggling in ways we cannot see, and it's our responsibility to watch out for them. Datara may no longer be with us, but her spirit lives on through the work her mother continues to do, through the lives that are being saved, and through the countless individuals who will find hope in the foundation she inspired. Her legacy will continue to help others, and it will never be forgotten. We miss her. We love her. If you found this video inspiring, don't forget to share it with your friends and family so that they too can learn the dangers of toxic relationships. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos like this. Let's keep sharing these important stories because together we can make a difference. See you in my next video.